Hey everybody, Dr. J here, and welcome to another episode of the PlayThru. Today we're going to be talking about a new game that just released from Kickstarter by Kolossal Games Western Legends. Before we dive into how to play the game, just remember that there's a couple of videos that go along with this if you're listening on audio only, and head on over to the playthru.net to check out that and other content, and that's PlayThru, Playthru. And also, if you already know how to play the game, go ahead and click the link above, and it'll take you to our discussion of the game and what we thought about it. All right, so let's dive into how to play Western Legends. So the first thing that you need to understand about this game is that it's a sandbox game. And what a sandbox game is you can do whatever you want within reason. I mean, it's not Minecraft where it's basically open world, do whatever. But within the world of Western Legends, you're basically free to write your own story. And that's really what Western Legends is about. Each of you takes control of a famous Western person, whether an outlaw or a lawman or a frontiersman like Kit Carson, and then you just sort of make your own story. So we'll go over first the turn order and how each person takes their turn. So we'll use this fancy player aid here to kind of guide us through it. So the first thing you're going to do on your turn is you're going to gain either $20, 2 poker cards, or 1 poker card and $10. Now the purpose of the poker cards is they're used when you're fighting other people or when you're fighting bandits, and it's sort of like a high card wins sort of situation. And we'll talk about the combat a little bit later. So you can $20 or 2 poker cards. Then you choose which mount and which weapon you're going to use for your turn. So you've got all these different horses that you might be able to pick from, or different guns. You have to pick one at the start of your turn, and then that's what you'll be using for throughout the rest of your turn. So on your turn, you get to take 3 actions, and we'll talk to you about what those actions are. So the first thing you can do is you can take a location action. So if you see on the board here, there's a lot of different little circle symbols that represent different places where you can take an action. So these cards here, that's the Saloon. This barrel symbol here, that's the general store. You've got these pickaxes, which show where the mines are at. The railroad, the Cabaret, the doctor's office, and then there's some bandit hideouts scattered around the board. And these 2 locations up here are ranches, and we'll talk about what those do too. So those are the locations. Oh, I almost missed this one. This guy's sitting on top of the bank there, which is also a very important place on the board. So the first thing you can do is you can take a location action. You can use an action card. So some of the poker cards have actions on them, and they do various things. Some of them will give you extra actions on your turn. Some of them will just give you money. So there's a variety of actions on the poker cards as well. The next thing you can do is you can fight another person. And there's 3 different ways that you can fight, and we'll talk about that when we talk about how the fighting works. And then, of course, there's moving. So if you have a horse, you can move the number of spaces that's on your mount. For instance, Billy the Kid here has a workhorse, and he can move up to 3 spaces a turn. Whereas Kit Carson has a mule, and it can also move 3 spaces a turn, but if you upgrade it, it can move up to 4. So if you don't have a mount, if you don't have a horse, you can only move 2 spaces, but you can do the move action as many times as you want to for your 3 actions a turn. So if I were this purple player here in Dark Rock and I wanted to move down to the railroad, I could use my movement, and I could go 1, 2 as one action, 1, 2 as another action, and then use my 3rd action to get to the railroad space. But then my actions would be done. All right, so let's talk about the location actions. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Saloon. If you end up going to the Saloon, and you'll notice the Saloon is at an intersection of 3 spaces, you have the opportunity to go there and play some poker. And if you win, you can get money. Makes sense, right? If there are other players in the town borders, so if you see here, this person's at the Saloon and this person over here is on the bank, but also within the borders of Dark Rock, they can get in on that poker game and play poker against you. Now, if someone else decides to jump in the game, you just use the poker cards from your hands, and you play quick Texas Hold'em. You flip over the top 3 cards of the deck, and then you put together the best hand. Whoever wins is going to take the $50 and a $10 ante from every player who decided to get in. If there aren't any other players who want to get in, you play against the dealer and someone else plays as the dealer. So the next spaces we're going to talk about are these ranch spaces up here. These ranch spaces are very important because there's two different things you can do here. So whenever you land on a ranch space, for instance, this character here, you can take an action to pick up one of these cattle tokens. And then you have a choice about what to do with it. You can either take it down to the railroad, and that's called wrangling cattle, and that's going to get you victory points, which is how you win the game. And it will also get you marshal points up here on this marshal track. And we'll talk about the tracks in just a second. Or you can take it to the other ranch, and this is called rustling cattle, which is bad. You're kind of stealing it from one ranch and taking it to the other, and that's going to get you wanted points and make you move up on the wanted track. And we'll talk about the wanted track and the marshal track in just a bit. So next we'll talk about the general store. Again, the general store is like the saloon. It's at an intersection of 3 spaces. So if you're in one of those spaces, you can shop at the general store. And so if you see here, there's all these different things you can buy. You can buy horses, you can buy guns, and each one of them has a $sign in the top right. And that's how much you have to pay in order to buy that item. You'll notice the guns and the horses can be upgraded. So if you go to a general store and you already have one, for instance, Kit Carson has this rifle. If he pays $40, he can upgrade his rifle, which gives it an added ability. It also gives points at the end of the game. So there's the added benefit of that. So that's what you do at the general store. Next is the Cabaret. This is the pleasurable company spot. You can basically go there and spend your money to get victory points. It's $30. You drop $30 there and you can get 1 victory point. They're called legendary points in this game. And that's what this track along the bottom of the board is. And you'll notice there's this symbol here. Once somebody reaches that, that's going to trigger at the end of the game. And you can kind of choose where you want that to go. When we've played, we've put it at 20. If you want to be sort of thematic and westerny, you could put it at 21, like blackjack. It's an option. Anyway, so the next space we're going to talk about is the bank. Actually, before we talk about the bank, let's talk about the mines, because that's kind of important before we talk about the bank. So anytime you're on a mine space, you take the mining action, you get to roll these 2 dice. And there's a few different symbols on the dice. First of all, there's the X, which is just gravel. It's bad. You don't want to roll that. Next is the $sign. If you roll that, you get $10. Then there's the $sign with the little repeat arrow. That gives you $10, plus you get to re-roll the die. And finally, there's gold nuggets. And when you get a gold nugget, you take one of the gold nuggets and you put it in your little tin on your board. And you can have up to 4 of those at any one time. So the reason that we talked about that before the bank is that you can go to the bank here in Dark Rock and you can deposit your gold nuggets for money and for legendary points. So each one is going to get you 1 legendary point and $20. So lots of people, when they play this game, they'd like to go to the mine, get 4 gold nuggets, and then take it back to the bank and just do that over and over again. And it's a pretty solid way to get points. Also, one other thing you can do at the bank is you can rob it. This wouldn't be a Western game if you couldn't rob a bank. So that's one of the actions you can take. If you want to rob the bank, then you do a fight against the bank guard. And like I said, we'll talk about how to do the fights in a little bit. But if you win, you're going to get $80 and you're going to move up 3 spaces on the wanted track. So it's the easiest way to get wanted points is by robbing the bank. So if you're a big outlaw, that might be some incentive for you to go do that. Next is the doctor's office. You can go here to heal any wounds that you get. So if you lose fights, then you can gain wounds and you go there and just pay $10 and wipe them out. And that's what this little tracker on the bottom of the board is. And then we already talked about mining. So that's all of the location actions that you can take on your turn or throughout the whole game. So let's talk about fighting really quick, because there's going to be a lot of fighting in this game. This is the Old West. There's a lot of arresting outlaws. There's a lot of robbing people. There's a lot of dueling. And that's the different kind of fighting that you can do with the other players. So let's talk about a fight with another player first. So if I've got this character here at the Cabaret and this other player decides to come in, they have a choice between 3 different kinds of fighting that they can do. if the person who they are deciding to fight is wanted, and the player is on the marshal track, then they can choose to try to arrest them. So what arresting them does is if you win an arrest, the person who loses is going to end up in the sheriff's station over here in Dark Rock, and then they will get knocked off of the wanted track. So if they have any wanted points, they're going to lose all their wanted points. If you choose to duel them, that's just seeing who's the best, and you're trying to get legendary points. So if you win a duel, you get 2 legendary points. And it doesn't give you wanted or marshal points or anything like that. It's just sort of like a competition between, I don't know, friends. I don't know. Usually when you shoot somebody, something bad happens, but when you duel, it's not the case. And then finally, you can rob the person. Now, obviously, this is the funnest way to play this. So when you rob somebody and you successfully rob them, you're going to get wanted points. So you're going to go up on the wanted track, and you can steal, if they have a cattle token, you can steal their cattle token, and then you steal half of their money and half of their gold nuggets. So like I said before, there's that strategy of running to the mine and going to the bank. The downside to that is people are going to want to rob you if they see that's what you're doing all game. And that's how fighting other players works. Now, we talked about how you play with cards. So each player is going to have a hand of cards, and each time somebody fights, each player is going to put down their 2 cards. So if these 2 characters are fighting, they're going to put down 2 cards and then simultaneously flip them over. Oh, Billy the Kid played a 9, while Kit Carson only played a 5. So obviously a 9 is higher than a 5. Billy the Kid is going to win this fight. It's very simple. The combat's very simple, and so that's one of the things that I really enjoy about the game. So there's one other way to fight, and that's fighting a non-player character. So there's 3 different non-player characters in the game. There is the bandits, who are at the different bandit hideouts. There's the guard at the bank, and then there's the sheriff. So they all work the same way. Basically what you do is you have your hand of cards, and you again pick which one you're going to end up playing. And then the player to your right will take on the role of the NPC, and they have these special fight cards. So if you're playing a bandit, they're going to take 2 cards, and they're going to pick one that they want to play, and each one has a sort of special ability on it. So for instance here, this player got a queen and a 5. If they decide to play the queen, it says the other player in this fight draws 1 poker card. And then there's the 5. If they play the 5 instead, the other player in this fight gains 1 wound. If that player defeats a bandit in this fight, they may not choose to gain marshal points. So there's a number of effects on the fight cards. And the only real difference between them is if you're fighting a bandit, they're going to draw 2 cards. If you're fighting the guard at the bank, they're going to draw 3 cards. And if you're fighting the sheriff, they're going to draw 4 cards. So the sheriff is a very hard NPC to beat. So try not to get into a fight with them. Try to avoid them if you're on the wanted track. Which brings us to the wanted and the marshal track. So I'm going to talk about that really quickly. There's 2 different tracks, the marshal track and the wanted track. And anytime you do something that's good on the side of the law, you're going to get marshal points. And as you move up the track, you're going to get money, and then you're going to get legendary points. And then at the end of the game, you're going to get legendary points for which row on the marshal track you're on. The wanted track is different. As you move up the track, you're only going to get to draw poker cards, so it's not as good. You don't get money or legendary points for it. But at the end of every turn, you're going to get legendary points for which row of the wanted track you're on. And so if there's a player who's up here on the 3rd level of the wanted track, and they're getting 3 points every turn, that's going to make them a very big target for the marshal players, because they're going to want to stop them from getting that constant source of points. And so it really does simulate somebody being the most wanted player. And there's one other thing we need to talk about before we're done here, and that's these story cards. So at the end of your turn, if you had achieved one or both of these conditions that are on these story cards, you're allowed to take one of your tokens and put it on the card. And when that card fills up, then you resolve the effect. So this one says, gain any number of marshal or wanted points. Let's say the red player did that, and they put the token on the last spot. So we've got red and blue on this card, so this card, we're going to read it, and it's going to apply to the red or the blue players. And there's a whole story thing that goes along with it. And it allows you to put more bandits on the board, and the player who triggers it oftentimes gets to move the sheriff around. So there's a lot of upsides to completing the story cards. And that's it for Western Legends. That's how you play it. It's just you go and you do whatever you want to do. So enjoy. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here for this How to Play of Western Legends. If you want to hear our thoughts on the game, go ahead and click the video and that'll take you to the discussion portion of it. And if you want to check out some of our other content, head on over to the PlayThru.net. Make sure to like and subscribe. And remember that's PlayThru, PlayThru.